This is a love letter to my hometown. I grew up in a little town in the south of Germany between the ages of 2 and 13. There are a lot of different memories I associate with this place, from the awesome villa I lived in with my family to the hikes up the hills and the pranks I played with my friends. The train station is a very familiar place to me, since I commuted between my hometown and a bigger town to go to school from age 10. I like to buy a bag of sweets called a bunte Tüte for €1 at the small shop here. They built a bus terminal after I had moved away, but other than that, it still looks pretty much the same as 20 years ago. Unfortunately, that is not true for many of the shops I used to go to, especially the bakeries. Bakeries are, or at least used to be, an important part of every town, and the south of Germany is also well known for some of their bakery items like pretzels or sourdough bread. As a child, however, I was more interested in the sweets they were selling. Just like the shop at the station, bakeries often sold sweets from small containers for a few cents. At one bakery, I even got the same sweets as 20 years ago. I'm so happy I went there before the closing time on Saturday. The sweet doesn't really have a name, it's just a plastic tube filled with dextrose powder and citric acid. I also bought Wiebele, which is a very regional treat made with sugar and eggs, similar to Russian bread. The shape of these always reminds me of an alien starship from one of the old Star Trek video games, but I couldn't tell you anymore which race the ship belonged to. Then I had to go see the house I used to live in. I already mentioned that it was a villa, and you can see it here for yourself. We lived on the ground floor, and it was an amazing apartment. One room had a big wood stove oven and wood paneling on the walls, and we still called it the hunting room as animals were shown on the oven tiles, and it was fitting. I remember once in summertime when we had a party in the garden with quite a few people. There was a campfire and we threw dry branches of some kind of bush into the fire. The dried up leaves would create little explosions in the fire, and that was the only time that I was not afraid of the loud sound it made. I retraced my steps from the house further into the city center, passing the old swimming hall, the small hill which we children used to slide down in winter, and the city park. The beer garden was still closed, so I just took a look if all the old items were still there. The pinwheel was still standing, as well as the old slide. The jumping circles I could also find, but the snake with moving parts had been replaced by a container kindergarten, it seemed. In the town's festivities building at the end of the park, I used to perform with my gymnastics team, but it was closed when I got there. My old kindergarten, just a few meters further, had been turned into apartments from the looks of it. Last time I came here, the kindergarten was already gone, but I could still see a painting of the rainbow fish on one wall. Only the sign that used to lead to the kindergarten's playground remains now. The city center was kind of sad to see, to be honest. So many shops were empty, and some of them seemed to have only recently closed, maybe as a result of the pandemic. I could only make out one new addition to the town, and that was a big organic supermarket in a spot where only a parking lot used to be, and the telephone booth that my best friend and I did prank calls from. The other big supermarket I remember from my childhood was gone, and the building looked very deserted. No more cheesy puffs, sugary hard candy, and Coke from this place then. Later on, I made my way to more places out in nature. There was one place in particular I wanted to find again. In my distant memory, I had this image of a mossy forest with a stream in the middle, where I played with my friends and we had the best time. It was like in a fantasy novel, so I wanted to find that place again, and I did. Along the way, I often thought, is this the exact place I had pictured in my memory? So I took a lot of footage from the places I thought were the one. But as I got further, I realized that it was only at the very end that I had reached the exact place. It was much more bare now in winter time, but I'm sure it was the one. I would love to see it again in summer, but I assume that over the years the vegetation here also has suffered and it's not at all as pretty as in my memory. Being determined to see 2 other places which required hiking, I went on a somewhat dangerous route up to the Geiselstein. The route was steep and slippery, and I had to hold on tight to branches and trees whenever I could. On Geiselstein there is a playground, a huge field, and a small house that also serves food and drink in the warmer months, operated by the local sports community that I also used to be a member of. I was so tired after my hike, but I had to check out the place my friend's parents used to run. It's a restaurant connected to the brewery. Yes, the town has a brewery, just like a proper German town should have, and it got renovated recently. Some elements are still there, but the modern vibe was honestly much needed. My friend used to live in the apartment above the restaurant, but I don't know if there still is an apartment up there to this day. The next day, my legs were still very weak from the day before, but I just had to go to the Helfenstein-Ruine before taking the train back home again. So I went, and I had completely forgotten how steep the way is. It's not far from the station, but boy oh boy is it steep. Reaching the old linden tree on the way was tough. Having reached all the way to the top, I enjoyed the view and used the crank on the old fountain, which does nothing, but is still fun. In the summer months, this ruin also becomes an outdoor restaurant, and that reward is definitely needed for me to lure me up there again. As a child, you still have more energy and forget these hikes easily. My legs were shaking as I came down, and I barely made it back to the station. I would have liked to see even more places on the other side of town, but my energy was just all used up. It was nice to see my hometown again, and I think once in a while you just feel nostalgic for the past and revisit the good old times. Sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. And if you want to visit your hometown, go do it. I'm sure I will come back again one day myself.